how do you present that? Yeah, where does that live? You know, a lot of stuff gets done and sits on a shelf, and I think that's what, you know, moving forward I'm trying to avoid, I guess. All right, hello everyone. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here. So just want to put it out front. A vast majority of these photos are from PG Archive, the Oregon Historical Society. Old Oregon Photos has a number of photos of the area and PG history, and also just various research projects that PG's undertaken over our long history. This presentation is really based on my own independent research. I've been in this role for about 3 years. So really, it's my job to make sure that we don't destroy cultural resources as a company. And if we have to impact cultural resources, what we're going to do to mitigate for that, to make sure that history is not lost. Just want to put out there, there's probably some inconsistencies in this. As you might imagine, when you have a company dating back 150 years, record keeping was not always a top priority. Dates didn't always line up, names didn't always line up. Not really sure how business was done around the turn of the century, but it's not as concise as it is today. So if I get a date wrong, please excuse me and please let me know. Also, I just want to put it out there, I'm not being paid to be here. I'm here purely as a volunteer. That being said, if you're unhappy with the presentation or your recent power bills, please share those complaints. Please share those complaints with Stephen. Double duty here. So in my department, we have a saying, power the future, protect the past. Obviously, as a company, it's our goal to make sure that there's enough electricity to support us in the future. But it's my responsibility in my department to make sure that we're also protecting the past, and part of that past is our history. So you might be wondering, what are cultural resources? I think there's a lot of people here that like history, but cultural resources are essentially archaeology sites and historic properties, and those run the gamut. If you've heard of the National Historic Preservation Act, it's any type of historic property or site of significance to any group. That's tribes, historic groups, other unrepresented groups all across the area that we service, which is primarily the Portland metro, but we have generation sites in Washington, Idaho, Montana. So our area really goes beyond the Portland metro. So PG, along with its predecessors, have a really unique history. Obviously, it's our goal to power the future, but we're very proud of where we came from. There's at least one person here that worked here. When you go to work for PGE, you often don't leave. When I started, they told me, well, it won't be too long before your spouse works here, your kid will be an intern here in about 15 years. And, you know, I like to joke, and I start with this photo because I wouldn't say we're as proud of our company and our history as we were back in the 1930s and 40s based on this photo. I have found more than a dozen of our substations that were lined with LED lights. During this era, we were really trying to convince people that electricity is good in the future. But it is our goal as a company looking towards a decarbonized future while also protecting our history as a company. So when Stephen asked me to do a presentation on 150 years of PG history, I originally thought, yeah, probably about 4 hours. When he told me less than an hour, I said, okay, we're going to have to come up with some themes. So for that reason, the themes of this are really kind of organized like a timeline. I know we're looking at doing Timeline Hall, involved with that process. I'm going to be working with that. So this is kind of broken up by both the generation history, but also kind of the company history, if you will. So it's going to be pretty high level. We won't get into the weeds tonight. Willamette Falls, birthplace of PGE, going back to 1888. So 1868, the Willamette Falls Canal and Locks Company is formed. Primary goal, build a navigation around the falls. I'm sure you've all heard of the locks. Some of you more so than others. 1870, 1873, the Willamette Falls Navigation Canal and Locks is constructed by the Willamette Falls Canal and Locks Company. This is where the histories get a little vague. That company now owned a bunch of property around the locks, and they said, what are we going to do now? We have all this land, we have the locks built, and they had heard about this thing called hydropower that was happening across the nation. So they said, let's do that. Let's rename our company to the Willamette Falls Electric Company, formed in 1888, and let's build a hydro plant at Willamette Falls. I do include this photo before I get into the first hydro. It's one of my favorite photos I've ever seen of Willamette Falls and the locks. It's in 1872 circa. It's the date that is told to me. Only photo that I know of, and Russ, maybe you've seen others, that show where the paper mill is. So if you know about this area, this is all paper mill now, without anything on it. This photo really gets to the tribal significance of this area. There's some impacts, we'll say, from tribes being on this land, fishing on this land in this photo. And of course you have the locks, the early locks. The reason I include this is today we at PG call this the island. I like to clarify for everybody in the company, this is not an island. We made it an island, and by we, I mean people, by forming this canal. There is a natural island that sits out here, right here, that you'll hear refers to as Moore's Island. We now call the whole thing Moore's Island, and I'm on a mission to correct everybody, and that Moore's Island was an actual natural island that sat out in the middle of the falls. Everybody knows about the locks. Don't really need to talk about the history of the locks, I assume, and you're aware of what's happening currently with hopefully reopening the locks someday soon. So another big part of our history starting at Willamette Falls is the paper company. And a reason I include this in a PG history is because our power plant was embedded in it, and we own the land, and we own the land today. We lease the land and the buildings to the paper company that's operating today, but that paper company, I'm talking about the Westland Paper Company, not the one on the Oregon City side, has been in operation since 1889. Willamette Pulp and Paper Company was the name back then. Today it's the Willamette Falls Paper Company. The other reason I include this photo is we are looking at the foreground here, which is the T.W. Sullivan power plant, which I'll be talking about in a minute. So that is the tail race of the power plant. We had a project last year that was removing bricks from that beach there that had been dumped down over the last 100 years. We found bricks dating back to 1880, 1890 from all over the world. It was quite an incredible project if you're into brick history. So again, 1888, Willamette Falls Electric Company. They wanted to generate hydropower at Willamette Falls. So what'd they do? They built a dam. Essentially, the dam is a 6 to 8 foot tall, depending on the spot, concrete dam that wraps all around the apex of the falls. It's approximately 600 feet long in total length, and it remains today. It has been modified. We've added some components to help control flow a little bit, but essentially it operates as a diversion dam, moving water towards the westland side of the river into the hydro plant that exists today. So we built our first powerhouse on the Oregon City side of the river. Station A, you'll notice tonight, all of our power plants started with Station. We've renamed most of them over the years, but Station A was constructed shortly after construction of the dam, company's first power plant. Went into operation in 1889. Most people have heard this fact. It's kind of the first, sorry, I have to click twice. The first of the company. We produced the nation's first long-distance transmission of electricity on June 3rd, 1889. This was DC current, running 14 miles from Willamette Falls to downtown Portland. We quickly learned this is a really bad place for a power plant. Just 1 year later, a flood comes in, completely wipes out the power plant, and so it had to be rebuilt only 8 months after being completed. This is a photo from shortly thereafter in 1890 of the reconstructed Station A. As you see, it got a little bit bigger, but it was completely rebuilt. So just 1 year after providing long-distance transmission of electricity, PGE had another first, which is the first company in the nation to provide long-distance AC transmission from this same location, downtown Portland. So, and I'll get into like some eras of PGE and kind of break it out just for you to kind of follow along the timeline. So 1892 and 1906, this is the first time we become Portland General Electric. Name changed a few times over the decades, back and forth from PGE to other names, but this is when PGE came to be in 1892. So purchase is underlined intentionally. Originally it wasn't. I had it written that we became Portland General Electric, and our legal department informed me that we purchased that company. We didn't become Portland General Electric. And why that's important to note is because somebody from Willamette Falls Electric Company split off from that company, formed their own company, and then acquired that company. So although they're a predecessor company, we are not the same company that built the locks. Historian, not an attorney. So because of that first plant continuously being flooded, 1895, we do build a new power plant, which exists today, the T.W. Sullivan Hydroelectric Plant. I'll send some photos on the next slide of that. And during this time, we were also exploring other forms of generation. There was about a half dozen steam plants around downtown Portland during this era from 1901 to 1906 that were constructed. And again, they're all stationed with a letter. Some of them are still there. I haven't done all the recon to find exactly where they were, but if you dove in deeper, I'm sure you could find the exact locations. 1905, the Lewis and Clark Centennial Exposition comes to Portland. The PG board president at the time became I was on the board of the directors as the president for the exposition. He went to DC and lobbied that the next exposition should be in Portland. The way I've read in some journals is essentially it was a marketing campaign, trying to convince people to move to Oregon because we have electricity. So I think there's a whole story to be told there that I'd like to explore some year, but for this part of the presentation, won't be able to dive in too much. So Station A today, this is a current photo that I took. It is managed as an archaeology site. It just kind of, we call it the dance floor, if you've looked down there, seen that. But all the old penstocks are still in place. So because we realized this was a really bad place, we built the powerhouse on the other side of the river that is right here. Still exists today, Station B. That's a photo of it. I don't know if I have the date of that photo. It has been changed. The reason I include this, if you go out there today, which I know a number of people have been on tours, it's slightly taller. The only alteration to this powerhouse has been a seismic upgrade in hopes that it would survive the big one, assuming we ever get it. 1950s was about when our power plants started being renamed. This one was renamed after T.W. Sullivan. He was pretty much the hydro engineer that built hydro plants in Oregon during this era. Pretty much all of our power plants from 1895 through the 1940s and 50s were at least designed or based on ideas that he originated. So just a few photos of our engine-driven generators or steam plants around the Portland Metro. Again, these were kind of all over, pretty small buildings, and I'd imagine a lot of those buildings still exist. Station E, 1905. And if you recognize any of these buildings, let me know. I have some like street addresses for some of them, but not all of them. So I do have, and I think a number of you have probably seen this full video, but I have a short clip that I'd like to share with you for those of you that haven't seen it. And then you don't have to listen to me talk for 50 minutes.
That another form of power was about to be perfected here.
For most Americans living in the 1880s, you still heated with wood, you cooked with wood, you illuminated your house with kerosene or with whale oil. And electricity really didn't exist. Towns were small.
In 1889, 3/4 of the U.S. was rural. Portland was a village of 44,000. For most people, electricity was an impractical wonder.
Electricity was really something of a parlor trick. It was a novelty. You had to live near where it was generated to take advantage of it because it couldn't be transmitted very far.
But that was about to change. Against the east face of Willamette Falls, on this outcrop, Portland entrepreneurs erected a modest-looking facility and strung it with wire heading 14 miles downstream.
They brought in technologies that were untried, and they set them out there in the water and kept their fingers crossed.
On the 3rd of June, 1889, water spun dynamos at the falls, and Portland would become a city of lights.
These crumbling remains are the birthplace of the technology that created the 20th century. A group of intrepid Oregonians had the crazy notion that they could take the power that was generated by the Willamette Falls and transmit it all the way to downtown Portland, the first long-distance transmission of electricity in the history of the world.
It was a sweeping technological revolution. The possibilities seemed without limit.
Once the Willamette Falls were harnessed and we could produce electricity, we had to figure out what to do with all of this power. But you can't store electricity. And so all of these new technologies sprang up to take advantage of this source. And the big one in Portland was trolleys, electric trolleys.
Just 2 years later, Portland had 40 miles of streetcar tracks. Over the next 3 decades, those numbers would double 3 more times. Meanwhile, another industry was leaping forward at the falls.
When it comes to pulp and paper manufacture, the falls are perfect. You've got all of this power, you've got all of this water, and you're in Oregon, where there are trees just down the road in every direction.
Farmers in the Willamette Valley were eager to be rid of old-growth timber, carpeting some of the nation's richest soils. Conveniently, a mill arises just west of the falls, and its owners bring a modern ambition to use wood for making paper, rather than rags and straw.
My family has been in this paper mill for 116 years and counting. My grandfather started in this mill in 1896. He was a paper maker. My dad started in 1932, and I started in 1974. I worked all the way from the bottom job up to the lead man, the foreman's job. Ran every job. I'm a fixer. I repair things.
Sludge up okay, Chris?
For decades, Ray's work looked much like what his father and grandfather knew.
Our log rafts came to us 2 city blocks long, all day long. We had trees that were 400 years old.
A single raft could move the load of 100 log trucks.
We would take a whole log, we'd cut her down to small blocks of wood, and then it went to the grind room and they ground it into pulp. It was a very demanding job, very demanding. The woods of Western Oregon met their demise at this mill, in this room.
In exchange for trees, mills made jobs and produced enormous quantities of newsprint for presses up and down the West Coast and beyond.
And newspapers in that era was what bound us together as a community. It was how you knew what the president was doing and what the politics were of the day and what was on sale at the Piggly Wiggly.
The old saws at Westland Paper Company are silent now.
I was here the last day that this ran, and it got very quiet. No more saws, no more noise. Dead quiet. Yep, I could hear the falls.
Yet just steps from here, the modern area of the plant operates 24/7, turning pulp from Canada into high-quality glossy paper for magazines and other publications. It's one of the most resource and energy-efficient mills in the region. A second large paper company across the Willamette, Blue Heron, is closed. And the original power plant at the falls is an archaeological landmark. But the complex that replaced it in 1895 on the west side of the river continues to generate electricity. It too made history. The company that would become Portland General Electric asked George Westinghouse to construct generators larger than any he'd built before. Westinghouse was doubtful, but he was a businessman.
He said, gee, I don't know if that's going to work. I'll make them for you, but I won't guarantee that they'll function.
They worked splendidly. Westinghouse became a brand name for a prosperous new industry, and the utility had the largest generating facility in the state. Today, the T.W. Sullivan plant is among the oldest continuously operated hydro plants in America.
T.W. Sullivan was a hydro engineer of incredible caliber and vision.
With intuition, creativity, and a slide rule, he was the man who powered Portland for half a century. Sullivan's presence may still be felt in these passageways.
I've never believed much in the supernatural, but when I was working down there by myself, I had that strange feeling that I wasn't alone.
Jack Phillips operated the plant from 1979 until he retired a decade later.
There was a lot of work, took a lot of maintenance to keep those old generators running. Where would we be without electric energy today?
After the Sullivan plant went online, change came quickly to the region it served. In 1905, Portland hosted the Lewis and Clark Exposition, the unofficial World's Fair. Electricity was a premier attraction.
The Lewis and Clark Exposition was, on the West Coast certainly, the first time electricity had really been used in such a outspoken kind of a way. Everything was lit up.
Thomas Edison strolled the concourse with Vice President Charles Fairbanks and with Henry Good, president of Portland General Electric. Oregon got discovered once more.
People came, the world came, millions of people saw what Oregon had to offer.
Within 5 years of the expo, Portland's population jumped more than 50%.
And everybody floods in, the city grows, the demand for power grows, and it really sets Oregon on a course to become what it would in the 20th century.
There we go. So yeah, show that video for a number of reasons. Again, one of the coolest part about my job, not that I like that there has to be impacts to historic properties sometimes, but I get to do mitigation to tell those stories. So the paper mill buildings, we're currently taking down a series of paper mill buildings, essentially the pulp manufacturing buildings. You may have heard that. I'm working on a mitigation project to basically tell that story and bring those artifacts out of those basements so that people can put their hands on them. I'm working with Stephen to bring some of those artifacts to the exterior of this building. I'm looking at an interpretive park, Old City Hall, which I'm involved with for interpretation, looking at bringing artifacts there. So hopefully that everybody can put their hands on those saw blades. I'm trying to get somebody to take a grinder, so if anybody wants one of those grinders in their front yard, grab my business card, I'll be happy to drop one off. Okay, so moving on. I think the other thing that video does is it really sets the stage for what comes next. We have all this electricity, people are coming here, but really fast we realize one hydro plant is not enough to power a 50% increase in population almost immediately over 10 years. So expansion, that was the next phase. And the other thing I've kind of hinted at, like we kind of change our name based on where the need is and like we kind of self-market for ourselves. There's all this electricity, they talked about all of the electric cable cars that run up and down the streets. I came from ODOT, you can't dig up a road in downtown Portland and not find these cable ties still. But so we changed our name in 1906 to the Portland Railway Light and Power Company. We were building these cars and these tracks because there was the power, we had the power, we needed to make money off it. People weren't having electricity in their homes, so we said, what else can we do? So we started building railways. 1906, 1917, more expansion into steam. We expand down into the Salem area during this time. Scott's Mills, there's an old grist mill down there, a flour plant. It was a hydro plant originally, so it was purchased from PG at some point and it was converted, but there was a diversion dam to divert water into a small hydro plant down there. 1907, during this time, we looked at the Clackamas River and we saw the potential there. So we moved our sites onto the Clackamas River with the building of Cazadero in 1907. Shortly thereafter, River Mill in 1911, which is downtown Estacada, and then 1912 with the Bull Run plant, which is not currently a PG-operated plant. A few more photos. So again, getting into Salem, we had a lot of operations down there. One of our main transmission lines runs over through the Willamette National Forest and dumps down into Salem, just for that reason, that we had a lot of office and presence in Salem, not so much anymore. 1910, Station L, a steam plant in Portland. Maybe some of you have been to OMSI. It was donated to OMSI in 1986. This is called Turbine Hall if you go to OMSI today. And it still resembles what it looked like when it was a steam generation plant. If you go in there, one of those steam generators are still in the middle of the room when you go there. So Clackamas project. So we operate our hydros underneath FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So we're both regulated by them, but also we meet compliance requirements for them. The Clackamas project is made up of essentially 4 major hydro plants with some smallers mixed in. I include this just for context. I assume kind of visually everybody's aware of what's included in the Clackamas project, but just for reference and dates. Okay. Cazadero is now known as the Faraday plant. Today, it was Station G, built, construction started in 1902, it was completed in 1907. Each of the hydros along the Clackamas are a little bit different. The Cazadero was a diversion dam about 3 miles upstream along Clackamas, water diverted into a flume, dumps into a lake, and runs through penstocks. This powerhouse, the original one, was demolished in 2019, and I'm also currently working on mitigation to tell this story. Mitigation originally started in 2019 before my time, so maybe people heard about some of the public outreach that was done for this, but it is operational again as of early 2023. Station M, 1911, is the Rivermill hydroelectric plant. It was constructed and remains operational today. It forms Estacada Lake, so this is a dam and powerhouse that kind of were put right in the middle of the river and then created a lake. What is unique about this is it is an ampersand-style dam, so it's a unique style of construction. It's essentially a hollow concrete dam that is kind of a concave shape. It was named after the engineer who designed it, and it's the only remaining type operational west of the Mississippi. So no plans to do anything with this, but it is definitely unique and very significant for its type in engineering.
Kenny, on the previous slide, was that a fish ladder or was that a stairwell on the front?
Fish ladder.
It was a fish ladder.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Are you going to talk about fish a little bit?
No. No, I'm not a biologist. I don't like fish. I'm actually envious of fish because, salmon, you say there's a salmon there, an eagle, and everybody stops what they're doing. And I'm like, if only I just had a salmon and an eagle, then people would stop and care more about historic properties. Station O, Bull Run hydroelectric plant, built in 1912. It was demolished partially. The buildings are still there. I don't know if anybody's involved with that, but I think it is owned by a nonprofit currently that has some plans to interpret it. But the Marmot Dam and Little Sandy Dam that provided water to the plant were demolished. 1909, so what, we're 15 years later. Showed this photo in the beginning, 1894. This was our corporate headquarters in 1894. I'm 90% sure it was located right here, based on photos of the neighboring building. So we built the electric building. This still exists today. There's a bar in there called the Electric Factory, I believe. I need to go there and ask them if they are just coincidence or if they know the history of the building. But this was 100% our corporate headquarters. I kind of call it our first operations center, if you will. And we have lots of photos of the interior and kind of the way that power was controlled and moved from an internal operations perspective within this building. But again, our first kind of corporate headquarters in downtown Portland. The fun fact about this is the exterior of the building was lit up with over 1,000 light bulbs, really as a hint or a reminder to people that, put electricity in your house. Again, probably a marketing idea at its core. So 1924, this is self-coined as the transitional years by me, and kind of the reason I say that is we had built all the original hydro plants along the Clackamas. We were kind of just operating. The name changed away from railroads. We weren't doing the cars and the cable cars anymore. We became PEPCO, the Portland Electric Power Company. We went back and forth from PEPCO a couple times. There's a number of buildings, including this one by OMSI, that still exists today that has PEPCO pressed into the top of it. So another just kind of hint to the history of the company. The one plant that was built during this era is the Oak Grove hydroelectric plant, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a later slide. One part of our history that, in a future research project I'd love to undertake is our expansion. We were buying little PUDs, we were expanding service territory, we were getting out to where we are today gradually over time. We didn't always provide power to the whole area, so I think that's a unique history that is still to be dove into. 1930, Pepco changed its name to the Pacific Northwest Public Service Company, and PG was a subsidiary company, so PG comes back again at this era. So kind of, it comes and goes. We weren't always PGE, we were PG kind of the start, and then we go back and forth. I include that photo of the cable car only because it's one of the coolest photos I've found. And they still exist today, those cable cars. We're working on a project to rehab them currently, but essentially they provide access back and forth across the river for maintenance on the transmission lines. They were built by PGE.
That's at the
Clackamas, yes. There's eight crossings individually. Still use them. They've been not operational since 2021, and the number of calls that we've gotten of what do we need to do through permitting to get these operational again. So I love it as a historian that 100 years later, this is still the best way to get across the river. We still don't know how to get across the river other than these cable cars. So just reference back to the map, I'm going to move further down or upstream to the Oak Grove Powerhouse now. So Oak Grove Powerhouse, built in 1924, remains operational today. This is the fourth type of hydro generation on the Clackamas. This is a piped water that runs 7 miles across the surface. So if you've been up into the Mount Hood National Forest, there's Timothy Lake, Lake Harriet. So basically water originally pools at Timothy, runs downstream into Harriet, and then at Harriet it's diverted into a pipe that's about 8 to 10 feet in diameter, runs on the surface for 7 miles, and then directly above Oak Grove, a little gatehouse, if you will, and it drops 800 feet straight down the hill. I took this photo, I stepped back really fast because you see why. And the head pressure, it's a really small powerhouse, but the generation capacity greatly exceeds some of our larger powerhouses simply because of the technology, the idea and the siting of this structure. So again, remains operational today, very large producer for the company, and a part of our history. I talked to somebody before the presentation about Three Links Village. I told you it would be in here. I didn't just drop this picture in here. This is an amazing site. So we're in the middle of the Mount Hood National Forest, about 30 miles outside of Estacada. There was a camp there that was built by the Forest Service in the 1880s, I believe. When PGE acquired the land and was starting development of this penstock or this flow line where water ran along, building the powerhouse, they said, we need people on site. They can't go back and forth every day. So we expanded the camp, and it was essentially a construction camp during development of the project. And then after it was complete, we're still pre-cars. We didn't have cars, we didn't have the highway. We had a rail line that we had built from Estacada out to this area to transport people and equipment. So we built Three Links Village. Three Links Village housed operators and their families from the early 1920s up until 2018. If you started work at PG in like 2010 and you worked on the Clackamas project, they'd be like, do you want to live here? It's $7 a month. We'll take it right out of your paycheck. And I work with people now that live there, and they still talk about it all the time. This, unfortunately, had really dated mechanical features and plumbing and needed a lot of updates. So about 2015, the companies looked at what it would cost to rehabilitate them. Obviously, by then, people aren't really wanting to live there. People want to live in Estacada. They weren't driving this distance. I mean, I do it twice a month at least. It's not a big deal. So the need wasn't there. The cost was very exuberant. And it was always the plan when we built Three Links Village to ultimately return this area to the forest. Again, we're in the middle of the national forest. So we were in plans of talking about removing them. 2020 hits, riverside fires blow through, and nearly half of them are destroyed in the fire. I came onto the company shortly after this and went up and did an assessment of the building, and you'd have, they're pretty close together. So you'd have this one completely gone, burnt down to the foundation. These two untouched, literally like some paint peeling off of the houses. So not sure how the fire burnt through there. I know it burned through fast, but it's quite amazing that we had 7, 8 that remained post-fire. And another mitigation project I'm working on, which is what we were talking about, is telling the history of what it was like to live here. So I'm doing oral history interviews and really getting the feeling of what it was like to live here. And I heard some more stories before the presentation about the fond memories of living in Three Links Village. There was a school there that was built shortly after construction, and then it expanded over the years. I think this photos from the 60s, once they had added a gym on this side of the building. This was the ball field, as they called it. 2 months ago, I'm up there doing a survey as a part of the oral history. We have a videographer that's filming some of the setting and doing the oral history interviews. He stumbled over a lacrosse ball. And he's like, why is there a lacrosse ball? And I'm like, I've been telling you this history. Like, there used to be a school here, and there's no buildings now, obviously. And so we picked it up, and it's completely burnt on the top, and then white as day on the bottom. So I picked it up, and I'm trying to find a place to develop a archive or kind of a presentation about the history of Three Links paired with the video. So probably spend too much time talking about this as part of this presentation, but it's an amazing site, has an amazing history, and I look forward to sharing it with everybody, those of you that didn't live there or grow up there. 1932, 1948, back to Pepco. Why we went back and forth, I'll probably never know. But PG continues as the subsidiary just for the electric company. 1938, we absorbed some smaller PUDs that had been formed. PUDs, power utility districts, or public I've heard, yeah, public utility districts. Sometimes they were just power if they're just doing electricity. The public ones would do water or other functions as well. Had formed in kind of the more rural areas, rural Yamhill County. We were absorbing them starting this time, and then continue to over the next several decades, including we had service territory in Washington at one point, but that ended during this era as well. Have to talk about all the PG first, since we're doing a PG history presentation. I joke, I think linemen should have to drive these vehicles just so they appreciate their big trucks they get to drive today. But first utility in the nation to have two-way radios and line vehicles for more efficient dispatching. I think I kind of say that comically, more efficient versus today. But it's just a really cool photo that shows the era of, and part of our history. 1948, 1960s, back to PG. PG emerged as an independent investor-owned utility. So this is the first time, we're still a for-profit, privately owned company, but we're publicly traded now. And this is kind of the start of the investor-owned portion of the company. 1953, PG launched an extensive program to provide parks and recreation facilities for each of our hydro sites. You've probably heard of or been to a PG park. We have campgrounds all along the Clackamas. We have campgrounds out along Pelton Round Butte. Lake Billy Chinook is a PGE project, which I'll dive into a little bit. For this presentation, I'm really focused more on the early history, again, mainly for time, but we will now get into kind of the more recent history. So in the 50s is when we built Frog Lake and Timothy Lake, if you've been up there, including Timothy Meadows and the dam. This was not necessarily, we built the campground, and then about a few years later, FERC said, as a user of public waters, you have to be providing something back to the public, essentially, in the form of recreation, camping, water access. So this is when you really start to see lakes and recreation associated with hydro projects. It's a requirement to manage that. So we have a Parks and Recreation Department to this day. 1958, the last large hydro project that's built along the Clackamas, the North Fork Hydroelectric Plant, remains operational today. And late 50s, the Pelton Hydroelectric Plant, the Pelton Round Butte project, is first initiated. Two photos there, again, just kind of pointing to our Salem locations. 1930s, 1950s, same building, had a presence there for many decades. So just a few photos from the Timothy Lake expansion. I think I talked to Stephen and others about kind of the camping history of PGE in itself and recreation. We have lots of photos kind of showing about what recreation was in the 50s and 60s, and they're an amazing part, again, of our history. They don't really think about it as PGE history, but it's definitely an important part of something, including the lodge, which exists today and is still there and utilized by the company and can be leased out. North Fork Hydroelectric Plant. This forms North Fork Reservoir and then Promontory Park, which is a PG campground built in 1958. This is kind of the more traditional type of concrete dam that you're being seen constructed during the era. And this was the last, I'll say, hydro built along the Clackamas. However, we have added small generators to Timothy and Harriet. Other side of the mountain, Pelton Round Butte Hydroelectric Project. So it is 3 dams, if you haven't been over there, varying in size, 2 large and 1 really small dam. PG has a very deep history with the Warm Springs tribe on that side of the mountain. I will admit it was not always good, that relationship. I think there was a lot of back and forth around the siting of this. The tribe was heavily involved, and I think a lot of people don't realize that the tribe did become a supporter of the construction of the project, and down to the point that, the groundbreaking for the project was by the chief of the time of the Warm Springs tribe, Chief Joseph McCorkle, and the tribe was involved very closely in fish passage and access and gathering of plants for many, many years. And eventually come to about 2001, I think it was, they signed into a co-ownership agreement, and they, by I mean we, with the Warm Springs tribe. So currently today, it's about a 50% ownership between the tribe and PGE on that specific hydroelectric project. So the second large dam is built, Round Butte Dam. So this is the largest, farthest upstream, and this forms Lake Billy Chinook. Stephen mentioned I graduated from Newburgh High School. I didn't know that Lake Billy Chinook was a PGE plant until shortly before I came to work here, even though I had spent some time on the lake. So it's not a secret. I mean, there's parks and signs all over the place, but it's definitely a large generator for us. So 1960s and 1980s. Back to Portland General Electric. 1964, the Round Butte Dam is built. I'm sure some of you know the Trojan nuclear history of the company. I call this the recent history. As an architectural historian, I care about 50 years, and we're still in that era, but it was demolished well before it was 50 years old, so it never really got recognized as a historic site. That being said, we're currently working on a photo scanning project of all of the construction documents and kind of the history of it, because I think it's a very unique history to tell, and I think it's a history that we luckily get to tell in a positive light, if you know what I'm getting at. Now that it's part of our history, and I think it should be celebrated, even though we don't need to get into a debate about nuclear power or no nuclear power. Bethel Combustion Plant, 1973, largest generation plant in Salem, no longer operational. Beaver Combustion Plant, which remains operational today, built in 1974, is along with Port Westward, which is right next door. And then the Boardman Coal Plant, another part of generation history that is not always easy to talk about. However, we did decommission that one, and it started demolition in 2022. And I have some history on that if anybody's ever interested. So, what's happened since then? Did anybody watch the Trojan? I was not around to see that. I hear it was quite an event. I think there was like a hot dog barbecue on the other side of the river. It was live streamed. So Trojan Nuclear Plant closed after 16 years of operation. There's an excellent book on the history of Trojan, if you haven't read it. That site is still owned and managed by PG today. There is Trojan Park that's there that's managed by us, but it is not generating at that point. We're just managing it. 1997, 2006. Right? We're good not talking about that? Especially this guy up front. 2001, Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs signed an official agreement, partnership agreement with the Warm Springs Tribe of the Pelton Round Butte project. This is a co-owner, co-licensee. We run the project together. We own it together. We make decisions together. And then 2020, the Boardman coal plants closed and demolition started in 2022. Maybe some of you watched a live stream of that as well. It was a pretty cool one. So part of my work, and this is both mitigation driven, but also why I'm here today, I think PG has a really cool history. And I professionally get to do a really cool job, but I think they have an awesome history, and we have an awesome history that needs to be told, and it's not, to be perfectly honest. We don't have a history of PGE page on our website. So in my time, I've been driving towards that, and I have approval to do it, so I'm building it. And you know, I include this photo because I told our leadership, I'm like, we used to have storefronts where we talked about the significance of our company, and you know, we don't have that anymore, but let's share that history. And I mean, I pay my bill to PG every month also, and I think it's really cool that I work for and have service from a company that's been around, helped form Oregon to being what it is today, and actually does truly care about the history that we have. So anyway, more to come on that. I'll be sure to let everybody know when it's up, but I do have an email there. If you ever have a story that needs to be shared about PG history, you worked there, you had a relative that worked there, feel free to drop an email there or email me personally. Thank you. I include these photos only because I'm a historian and I love old black and white photos, but also because I think this is very symbolic. This wasn't that long ago. You know, 1914, we were going around to trade shows, and I've seen some TV shows recently where they're kind of hinting at like people trying to convince people to use electricity, and I think for us it's hard to think about. Like, I'm sure a number of us drove electric vehicles here tonight, and I mean, 1956, we're trying to convince people to have electric hot water heaters in their house. There's people in 1950s that didn't have all electric appliances, and I guarantee you not one of us in this room doesn't have some type of electric appliance in our house. So, and again, I include this because it's a part of our history as a people, electricity. I think it's part of our future. The need is only going up, demand is going up. We're going to be facing some really interesting challenges with all the decarbonization goals that we're being held to. You know, we don't necessarily get to decide how much we charge. We're really regulated as a public utility. So I think we all have to be thinking about this and thinking about not only the history of electricity, but what the future of electricity is and how the history continues to play a role in the future generation. That is all. Thank you.